On quiet nights in the wizarding world, when the enchanted candles dim to mellow gold, and the great libraries hush with breathless silence, there are whispers of 4 boys who walked the halls of Hogwarts long ago. Their names drift across time like warm embers: James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. Together, they called themselves the Marauders, mischief makers, rule benders, prank artists. But beneath their laughter was a story threaded with loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, and love deeper than most ever knew. It began in the autumn of 1971, when the castle first welcomed that year's new student. The air smelled of pumpkin pastries and fallen leaves, crisp and bright, and the Hogwarts Express rumbled across the countryside with a comforting rhythm. Inside one particular compartment, a messy-haired boy with round spectacles grinned at a dark-haired stranger. His eyes gleamed with playful energy. James Potter was born from old magic and ancient family lines, but he carried his heritage lightly as the breeze that played through his untamable hair. He was confident without being cruel, quick to laugh, quick to defend. Next to him sat Sirius Black, whose noble bearing and sharp grey eyes contrasted his rebellious smirk. Sirius belonged to a house famous for its dark traditions, but every fibre of his heart strained against them. He had chosen light over legacy, and it would cost him dearly. A little later, Remus Lupin joined them, shy and quiet. His robes hung a touch loose, as though he'd grown too fast with too little care. Remus carried secrets like heavy books in a worn satchel, neatly shelved, tightly closed. But behind his tired eyes shimmered intelligence and dry humor, gentle as moonlight. And finally there was Peter Pettigrew, small and eager, trailing admiration like a cloak. He longed to belong, to be valued, to not feel invisible. In that first year, their destinies intertwined in ways they couldn't yet see. The Sorting Hat placed the 4 of them in Gryffindor, and night after night the fire in their common room crackled warmly, reflecting in young eyes full of promise. Hogwarts was a haven, stone walls humming with enchantment, corridors alive with portraits that murmured secrets, the great hall glowing beneath a ceiling enchanted to mirror the sky. In those early days, the Marauders discovered their talents. James soared on a broomstick like he was born from the wind. Sirius mastered spells with startling ease. Remus excelled in academics, his wandwork precise and thoughtful. Peter struggled to keep pace, but he studied his friends quietly, learning how to mimic brilliance. Yet, beneath the laughter, Remus bore a quiet fear. Each month, when the moon waxed full, he disappeared. Students whispered theories, illness, family troubles, but Sirius and James began to notice patterns. Remus would return pale and exhausted, his hands slightly trembling. They were curious, but never cruel. It wasn't until their second year that they learned the truth. Late one evening, through hushed voices and a door left slightly ajar, they overheard teachers speaking of a werewolf at Hogwarts. Shock rippled through them, then confusion, and finally empathy. Remus expected rejection. Instead, he found acceptance stronger than iron. What followed became one of the most extraordinary acts of friendship in Hogwarts. Long history. Determined to ease Remus's loneliness during the full moon, James, Sirius, and Peter decided to become animagi wizards who can transform into animals. It was dangerous, complex magic beyond the curriculum, requiring years of study and perfect synchronization. But they were stubborn, clever, and united. James became a proud stag, tall and graceful. Sirius became a great black dog, loyal and fierce. And Peter, small, quiet Peter, learned to transform into a humble rat, unnoticed and overlooked. Together they accompanied Remus into the forbidden forest on nights when the moon painted silver shadows across the trees. Among the whispering leaves, Remus, as a werewolf, could play, run, and feel less like a monster and more like a boy with friends. The forest, ancient and vast, welcomed their unusual pack. Centaurs observed from afar, their hooves silent on soft earth. Boatrackles watched from branches, their tiny eyes glimmering. The wild creatures sensed something rare, a friendship bound by whispered promises and unwavering loyalty. As the years passed, their bond deepened. They invented enchanted items like the Marauders map, a work of brilliance etched with shifting ink and mischievous magic. On its parchment appeared every hallway, every classroom, every secret passage. It revealed footsteps, names, and heartbeats, a testament to the boys' ingenuity. At the corner of the map, their legacy curled in flourish. Messrs, Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief-makers. They loved the thrill of exploring beyond boundaries, slipping through hidden tunnels to Hogsmeade with pockets full of chocolate frogs. Butterbeer foam clinging to their upper lips like snowy mustaches. They swapped stories, teased one another, and imagined futures brighter than any star. But all stories carry shadows. Years later, a new figure emerged in their chapter, Lily Evans, with emerald green eyes and a voice soft as velvet. She was clever and kind, fierce when needed, compassionate unlike anyone James had ever known. When she debated topics in class, her words sparkled like tiny fireworks. For a long time, she disliked James's arrogance, but slowly his maturing heart softened, and his loud bravado grew into steady confidence. Sirius noticed the change, and felt both amused and proud. Remus, quietly observant, smiled knowingly. Peter watched with envy flickering at the edges. Yet while love blossomed in their small world, outside Hogwarts a storm gathered. A dark wizard named Voldemort was rising, gathering followers who whispered promises of power and purity. Students felt it in the library late at night. Tension like invisible threads pulled taut. Teachers spoke of caution. Owls carried letters heavy with worry. Even Hogwarts ghosts whispered of fear. When the Marauders graduated, they joined the fight against darkness, becoming members of the Order of the Phoenix. James and Lily married, laughter echoing through a cozy cottage, where the fireplace crackled warmly, and baby toys eventually scattered across rugs, soft as clouds. Sirius, ever the loyal friend, visited often. Their home smelled of cinnamon tea and old books. Remus traveled constantly, scouting and researching, always tired but always devoted. Peter followed them too, but his eyes had changed. The world felt too large for him, pressures too heavy, fear whispering in his ear. And fear is a dangerous counselor. Voldemort fixated on a prophecy, a child born at the end of July, destined to challenge him. James and Lily went into hiding, protected by the Fidelius charm, a spell that hides someone's location within the soul of a secret keeper. Everyone believed Sirius would be chosen. He was James's closest friend, practically family. But Sirius, fearing he'd be too obvious a target, suggested Peter instead. His logic seemed sound. It was a brilliant trick. Voldemort would never suspect Peter Pettigrew, small and harmless. So the secret moved from Sirius's brave heart into Peter's trembling hands. No one knew that, long before this moment, Peter had already knelt before Voldemort's shadow. On a quiet Halloween night, Peter revealed the Potter's hiding place. The cottage fell silent as Voldemort entered. A flash of green light ended to bright futures. And in the nursery, a baby cried, a lightning-shaped scar sealing destiny. When Sirius arrived, smoke swirled like ghosts around the ruins. Rage, grief, and disbelief tore through him. He hunted Peter through crowded streets. But Peter staged his own death, cutting off his finger, transforming into a rat, and slipping into the sewers. 12 Muggles perished in the blast he triggered behind him. Sirius was blamed. Azkaban swallowed him whole. Remus, hearing the news, collapsed into quiet sobs, believing both his closest friends gone, and the third, a traitor. His loneliness returned like a winter storm. Years passed. Harry Potter grew, unaware of the legacy behind him. Hogwarts welcomed him warmly, just as it had welcomed his father. When he first saw the great hall's star-painted ceiling and candlelit tables, echoes of the Marauders floated unseen memories, tucked into stone corners and dusty attics. Remus returned to Hogwarts to teach, haunted but gentle. Sirius escaped Azkaban after 13 long years, driven by love stronger than despair. And Peter Wormtail skittered in the shadows, allegiance shifting like wind through leaves. If you trace the story carefully, you'll notice how fate curled back on itself like a ribbon. The Marauders, once inseparable, spread across history as threads of light and darkness. They became cautionary tales, legends, ghost echoes. Their animagus forms lived on in symbolism. The stag representing sacrifice, the dog loyalty, the werewolf isolation, and the rat betrayal. And yet, somewhere deeper than pain, there still remained the warmth of teenage laughter in the Hogwarts common room, the smell of butterbeer, the glow of floating candles, the rustle of parchment late at night as the Marauders' map traced footsteps through forbidden corridors. Those memories softened the tragedy, like blankets pulled gently across old scars. When the world thought all was lost, Sirius offered Harry a home, simple words, humble and sincere. Remus watched over the boy with soft eyes, seeing glimpses of James in every mischief-filled grin, even Peter, in moments of trembling hesitation, remembered the warmth of belonging, and though he never redeemed himself, the echo of friendship haunted him. Time, like the Hogwarts Express, rolls steadily forward, but on quiet nights, when fireplace logs crackle and moonlight wavers through enchanted windows, the Marauders walk again in memory. Their footsteps are bittersweet, wrapped in soft nostalgia. Their story reminds us that friendships shape destinies, that loyalty is fragile, and that courage is found not in perfection, but in the willingness to choose the right path again and again. Even after death, love left footprints, and within Hogwarts portraits whisper their names still. But the tale stretches further, curling into deeper lore. The night James first met Sirius properly, the two boys sat by the Gryffindor fire as crackling sparks drifted like golden fireflies. They spoke of their families, James's proud but warm household, Sirius's cold ancestral home filled with scowls and expectations. The first winter at Hogwarts settled like powdered sugar atop the turrets, and the castle glowed warmly within the swirling snow. James and Sirius discovered quickly that they complemented each other flawlessly. James supplied the spark, Sirius the wildfire. Together they dared each other into harmless trouble, slipping dung bombs into unused classrooms, charming the suits of armor to whisper compliments at startled passers-by, and enchanting quills to sing operatic notes during exams. From the start, Sirius gravitated toward the Potter's warmth. In the common room, James would scribble letters home, while Sirius watched quietly, sending only short replies to a household where affection was scarce. Sometimes James's parents sent parcels, homemade biscuits, charming little trinkets that whispered messages of encouragement. James always shared them, insisting Sirius take the biggest biscuit. And though it seemed a small gesture, the kindness sank deep. Remus, meanwhile, blossomed among friends who saw him as a person, not a curse. In quiet corners of the library, they studied together by the soft golden glow of hovering candles, parchment rustling gently. Remus's notes were neat enough to impress even the strictest professor. Sirius leaned over his shoulder, teasing the perfect handwriting. James pretended not to notice, though he secretly copied Remus's study methods to improve his own. Peter watched with wide eyes, grateful to be accepted. He laughed hardest at their jokes, cheered loudest at James's Quidditch matches, and clung to the feeling of belonging like a cat curling into a warm patch of sunlight. But envy, even faint, can grow when watered by insecurity. As the Marauders matured, so did their pranks. In their third year, all four gathered around the mirror in their dormitory, eyes bright with excitement as they tested experimental glamour charms. With a flick of wands, Sirius's hair turned pastel pink, James sprouted antlers made of shimmering light, and Remus's robes transformed into a kaleidoscope of dancing patterns. They dissolved into laughter so hard they had to clutch their sides. Later that week, they discovered a curious secret passage behind a tapestry showing a bowl of fruit. When tickled, the painted orange on the tapestry giggled and rippled, sliding aside to reveal a narrow corridor smelling faintly of dust and forgotten magic. It led deep into the castle's underbelly, past unused classrooms and twisting staircases. We could map all of these. Sirius whispered, eyes gleaming like moonlit water. James grinned, pushing his glasses up. A map of mischief. Remus blinked, then smiled softly. Something clever, something useful. The idea of the Marauders map was born. In fourth year, a shift occurred. Lily Evans, once irritated by James's arrogance, began noticing the ways he'd matured, how he helped first-years struggling with transfiguration, how he offered his seat in the common room near the warmest fire, how he smoothed his hair less in front of her. Their conversations deepened from playful banter to debates that lasted hours, threaded with laughter and the occasional eye rolls. Sirius watched from the side, arms folded, smirking. "He's hopeless," he muttered in good humor. Remus simply nodded, marking his book, hopelessly smitten. But as friendships strengthened, the moon continued its cycle, tugging Remus into painful transformations. At first, Dumbledore arranged a safe haven for him, the Shrieking Shack, rumored to be haunted. Its walls bore claw marks and scratches from nights when Remus couldn't control the monster within himself. James, Sirius, and Peter refused to let him suffer alone. Study in animagus transformations became their nightly ritual. They pored over dusty tomes in candlelit secrecy, whispering incantations until wax dripped down to warm their fingertips. Months became years, and by fifth year they succeeded. That winter, the boys gathered beneath the full moon. Remus's yellow eyes were sharp and wild, but when he saw the stag, the black dog, and the rat approached, something inside him softened, just enough to remember he was loved. Together they ran through the forbidden forest, hooves thundering softly through pine needles, paws pounding earth rich with moss. Snow drifted from branches like silver feathers, and Remus felt for the first time almost human on a full moon. This bond changed everything. But where light burns bright, shadows watch quietly. Severus Snape, a boy from Slytherin, had long harbored resentment toward the Marauders, especially James. Their rivalry sparked from their first year, fueled by pride, hurt, and misunderstandings. Snape's bitterness sharpened, and in fifth year, Sirius made a terrible mistake, whispering to Snape how to reach the Whomping Willow during a full moon. Remus's condition was nearly exposed. Only James's intervention stopped disaster. Afterward, Remus withdrew into himself, pale with fear that he might have harmed someone. He forgave Sirius eventually, but something fragile in their trust cracked, invisible but present. Meanwhile, the wizarding world darkened as Voldemort's influence grew. Students whispered rumors by the stairwells. Parents sent anxious letters. The Daily Prophet headlines grew bolder. The sky over Britain seemed heavy, clouded by unseen dread. In seventh year, the Marauders stood on the astronomy tower under a blanket of stars. They spoke about the future, voices humming with hope. "I'll join the order," Sirius said confidently, eyes narrowed at the dark horizon. "I'm in too," James replied, though worry flickered in his gaze. Remus nodded slowly, uncertain of how society would treat someone with his condition, but willing to fight. Peter swallowed, heart pounding. His fear was growing roots. They made promises that night, promises inked in friendship. After Hogwarts, James and Lily's wedding became a beacon of joy. Flower petals floated through the air like tiny charms. Sirius stood beside James as best man, grinning wildly. Remus watched from the pews, a warm ache in his chest, proud and hopeful. Even Peter wept quietly, overwhelmed by emotion. At the reception, James raised a glass. "To mischief managed," he said softly. Sirius answered with a laugh. Clinking glasses, but Remus noticed worry behind his grin. The Order of the Phoenix became their reality. Missions were dangerous, tensions high. Auras disappeared, families fled their homes, and every owl brought news of another attack. Some nights, the Marauders gathered in dimly lit rooms, maps spread across tables, shadows dancing on walls. They discussed strategy, whispered fears, and tried to keep their spirits alive. But fear is a voice that whispers most in small hearts. Peter found himself cornered by enemies. Voldemort offered protection, or so Peter believed. Bit by bit, he traded loyalty for survival. Meanwhile, Sirius grew more reckless, hunting Death Eaters with fury burning in his chest. Remus traveled far, contacting allies, fighting prejudice along the way. James stayed hidden with Lily and their newborn son, Harry, a baby with his mother's eyes and his father's hair, destined for greatness. When the prophecy surfaced, Dumbledore acted. The Fidelius charm was chosen, a spell so absolute it sealed the Potter's location inside another soul. Everyone assumed Sirius would hold the secret. But Sirius, suggested Peter instead. No one would ever suspect Wormtail, he reasoned. It felt like brilliant misdirection. No one knew that betrayal had already taken root. Halloween night, 1981. Leaves rustled like old parchment. Wind croaked through tree branches. Peter visited Voldemort, whispered the address, and slipped into shadows. In Godric's Hollow, a baby giggled upstairs as his parents read by the fire. Outside, the world held its breath. The door exploded inward with a blast that shook the cottage. Lily screamed for Harry. James shouted for Lily, and then silent. The killing curse ended 2 lives in green light, but something ancient, woven from Lily's fierce maternal love, shielded Harry. The spell rebounded, fracturing Voldemort's soul, leaving only a crying baby in the rubble. When Sirius arrived, his scream tore through the cold night, grief raw enough to wound stars. He cradled James's broken glasses in shaking hands. He swore vengeance. He found Peter in a crowded street, but Peter, clever, always staged his own demise. Blew apart the road behind him, killed 12 innocents, transformed into a rat, and scurried into London's sewers. The Ministry arrived to find devastation. Sirius laughing hysterically, not from joy, but from fractured sanity. They condemned him without trial. Sudden silence in the cell. Tiny rat footsteps echoing in a sewer. Remus heard the news far away, collapsed to his knees, whispering James's name into the cold. Years drifted like drifting ash. Harry grew. Hogwarts welcomed him. History repeated its cycles. Remus returned as professor, his compassion quiet but steady. Sirius escaped Azkaban after 13 years, rage and hope carved into his bones. Peter resurfaced in the shadows, guilt scratching at his conscience like claws, but he continued running toward darkness. Their fates, tangled together since boyhood, converged again in the shrieking shack, wands drawn, dust swirling, betrayal revealed. In that haunted house where Remus once suffered alone, truth cracked open like thunder. Sirius stood as proof that loyalty can survive even hell. Remus trembled, tears threatening. Harry felt the weight of legacy settle on his shoulders. But Peter escaped again, slipping through fingers, scurrying toward Voldemort like a shadow seeking its master. War resumed. Sirius found brief happiness at Grimmauld Place, but his family's house was sick with old magic and resentment. Still, when Harry visited, Sirius smiled like sunshine cutting through storm clouds. In the battle of the Department of Mysteries, Sirius fell through the veil, ancient, whispering, soft as sleep. Harry screamed his godfather's name into an abyss that swallowed sound. Remus mourned again, deeper than before. Years later, Remus would fall too, in battle, leaving behind a son proof that love persisted even in war. And Peter Pettigrew, when faced with a moment of choice, hesitated. The ghost of friendship strangled him, and his own silver hand turned against him. In quiet ways, the Marauders' bond continued to echo. A stag Patronus protecting Harry, a dog Patronus running beside him, a wolf howling under moonlit memory, and somewhere in dusty ruins, a rat's tiny footprint fading. Yet, when you wander Hogwarts late at night, sometimes the castle feels warmer, as though invisible footsteps are treading softly through corridors, mischief gently stirring torches. Because stories don't really end, especially those built on friendship. And the Marauders' story, though tragic, glows like embers in a hearth, warm, cozy, bittersweet, mischief managed. If one stands at the edge of the Black Lake on a still autumn evening, when the waters are so calm they reflect the moon like a polished coin, there is a whisper in the breeze, faint but familiar. It is the echo of laughter once shared by 4 boys racing down to the water's edge, cloaks billowing, boots muddy from their dash across the grounds. The castle remembers them well. Its stones are steeped in their footfalls. For Hogwarts is not merely a school, it is a keeper of memories, and the Marauders left plenty. After Sirius's fall through the veil, Remus wandered the quiet corridors of Grimmauld Place, footsteps echoing like distant thunder. Dust clung to picture frames, cobwebs draped chandeliers like grey lace. He touched a doorframe where Sirius once leaned, smirking while teasing him about a long-forgotten essay. The memory brought a soft, sad smile to Remus's lips. Life, he realized, was composed of small moments, some bright as candle flames, some dim as dying embers. The Marauders had lived many such moments, and though tragedy overshadowed them, joy flickered fiercely in between. Remus later married Nymphadora Tonks, a metamorphomagus whose hair changed shades depending on her mood. Sometimes it glowed pink like sunrise, other times a melancholy blue. She reminded him of youth, of resilience, of how love could bloom even in seasons of war. They had a son together, Teddy, whose hair sparkled with magic even as an infant. Remus feared the curse he might pass on, but Teddy was born free. Meanwhile, Peter sank further into darkness. Voldemort's presence pressed upon him like cold iron. He served out of fear, long past the point of return. Once, in a quiet moment by a cold hearth, Voldemort regarded Pettigrew with slitted eyes. Loyalty, the Dark Lord whispered, voice soft as silk, is either born of love or terror. Peter answered nothing, but his silence was louder than words. He slept poorly, haunted by memories of nights beneath the moon, with boys who had trusted him. He curled into rat form, often hiding from himself. Shadows stretched long across his conscience. But rather than redemption, he chose to burrow deeper, hoping darkness would forget his name. Time crept onward like slow-moving fog. Harry, grown older, faced trials of his own, trials shaped by the legacy of his father and his father's friends. He learned gradually that people are never simple. James had been both brave and arrogant, Sirius both loyal and reckless, Remus both gentle and sorrowful, and Peter ... A warning whispered through generations that fear corrodes the soul's foundation. Harry carried these truths like runes etched into his heart. One evening, Harry stood alone in Gryffindor Tower, staring at the dormitory where his father had once slept. The room felt familiar to him somehow. The carved initials on the bedpost, the faint scent of old parchment lingering where Remus once read late into the night. It was as though time folded gently, just for a moment, letting him breathe the same air. The Marauders' map, tucked in Harry's robes, pulsed softly. When he unfolded it, tiny footprints skittered across the parchment, names glowing faintly like stars. The map seemed alive, aware, as though pleased to see him. Perhaps, Harry thought, magic like this carried spirit, traces of laughter, inked vows, brotherhood in secret ink. As the Second Wizarding War escalated, Remus stood beside Harry in the final battle. His eyes were tired, but determination burned bright, fueled by memory. In his heart, Sirius's fierce loyalty roared, and James's courage beat like a drum. Even Peter's tragedy lingered, a reminder of what happens when the world grows too heavy for the weak to carry. In the final confrontation, Peter hesitated when faced with Harry's mercy. His silver hand twitched, fingers curling around his own throat. Betrayal strangled the betrayer. As he fell, his final breath rattled like wind through broken shutters. Somewhere deep within him, a younger voice whispered, "I didn't want to be left behind." And then, silence. Years later, after the war's end, peace settled like quiet snowfall. Hogwarts was rebuilt. Children raced through the corridors again, robes fluttering behind them in crimson, emerald, yellow, and blue waves. Professors smiled, their eyes soft with hope. On certain nights, the caretaker might pause by the Marauders' map, tucked safely in a drawer. If you traced a finger across the parchment, the ink would shimmer faintly, as though waking from slumber. Names occasionally flickered their moony padfoot prongs, only for a moment, then gone again. Ghosts, memory, or magic refusing to forget. No one could say decades passed. Teddy Lupin grew, hair-shifting mimicries of his mother's moods. He asked often about his parents. Harry answered gently, weaving stories of Remus's wisdom and Tonks's fire. Stories thick with love and light. Teddy smiled, absorbing his heritage like sunlight on skin. And now and then, on full moon nights, Teddy stood at the edge of the forbidden forest, watching silver light pool like milk across the ground. He swore he felt a presence, calm, steady, grateful. Perhaps the forest remembered the wolf who once ran with friends. In the quietest hours, the portraits at Hogwarts sometimes whisper among themselves. Dumbledore's portrait smiles softly, remembering late-night conversations with Remus, memories of warnings thrown toward Sirius, who always smirked and did the opposite anyway. Other portraits nod solemnly, murmuring of bravery, foolishness, and the tenderness hidden between jokes. The Marauders became legend not because they were perfect, but because they were real, flawed, brave, afraid, loyal, broken, repaired, fallen, remembered. Their story is carved into banisters rubbed smooth by decades of passing hands, etched into the worn grooves of desks where restless students tap quills, and carried in the echoing roar of the Quidditch pitch, where cheers roll across the stands like storm waves. And sometimes, if you listen closely, when the wind weaves through the whomping willow's leaves, you might hear laughter, faint, carried from another time. One late evening, long after the wars, Harry visited the shrieking shack one final time. Dust lay thick like old secrets. Boards creaked softly under his boots. He lit his wand, bathing the room in gentle golden glow. He touched the scarred walls, the same walls that had enclosed Remus's pain, Sirius's rescue, Peter's betrayal, and truth's unveiling. Here history had unfolded like a tragic play. Harry closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, all of you." And though no voice answered, the air hummed faintly, like strings plucked on a distant harp. In the years that followed, the wizarding world healed. Statues of the fallen stood tall in sunlit squares. Children left flowers. Adults bowed heads. And yet the legacy of the Marauders endured not in stone, but in stories told by firelight, tales of loyalty, brotherhood, and the cost of fear. Their magic was not in spells, but in the bonds that even death could not erase. At Hogwarts, a new generation of pranksters once discovered an enchanted parchment in an abandoned drawer. When they tapped it with mismatched wands and whispered nonsense, ink swirled, forming familiar words. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The parchment glowed, revealing secrets of the castle once more. Footsteps lit up, passages unfolded, and laughter filled empty halls. Those pranksters never knew who created the map. They only knew it felt like greeting for long-lost friends. And somewhere, the castle exhaled content. If you ever sit in the common room at midnight, when only the crackling fire keeps watch. Take notice of the portraits lining the walls. Their eyes sometimes shimmer, as though reflecting figures unseen. A stag standing proud, a dog curled protectively, a wolf watching quietly, and a rat scurrying in the distance. Not all stories end happily, but even tragic stories can bring comfort, reminding us to cherish what light we find. The Marauder's tale is a constellation of such lights flickering, fading, flaring anew. Now, as the castle settles into another peaceful night, torches dim, and windows frost with gentle silver, the great hall's floating candles extinguish one by one, drifting down like sleepy stars. And somewhere, footsteps echo fluidly along the corridors, a playful patter, a loyal trot, a dignified clatter of hooves. A final whisper trails behind them, mischief managed. But the parchment never truly stays blank, not in Hogwarts, not in hearts. Because friendship, true friendship, leaves footprints that time cannot sweep away. Yet even with the bitter cold clinging to every stone in the castle, Hogwarts remained a place of gentle wonder. In the quiet pockets of the castle, late at night, Remus would sometimes wander alone. He'd pause at tall windows overlooking the snowy grounds, watching the lanterns flicker from Hagrid's hut like a tiny heartbeat in the dark. Those quiet moments humbled him. They reminded him that the world was bigger than his fears. Sometimes the moon hid behind thick clouds, granting him peace. And on those nights, he'd sit with a warm cup of tea in the common room, while the fireplace crackled softly, embers glowing like tiny, magical stars. He'd stroke the worn fabric of his sleeve and wonder, is there truly a place for someone like me? Across the corridors, James was restless in a different way. Even when the others slept, he tossed under his blankets, unable to quiet the storm of expectations swirling in his head. His talent for magic came naturally, but with every success came whispers of promise, of legacy, of responsibility. Sometimes he'd sneak out, not for mischief, but to practice. He'd twirl his wand through intricate forms, honing spells until his arms ached. It wasn't that he needed to prove himself to teachers, or even to his friends. It was that he wanted, just once, to feel like he was forging his own path, not walking one etched by family history. Sirius, meanwhile, found solace in laughter, though it often hid things deeper inside. In the privacy of his four-poster bed, curtains drawn tight, he sometimes sat awake long after curfew. The silence made space for thoughts he refused to entertain by daylight. Would he ever truly escape the shadows of his family's expectations? Their cold voices seemed to echo in his mind long after he'd left them behind. And then there was Peter. Among them, he felt small like a candle in a storm, yet he loved them fiercely. The way James tossed him a grin that felt like sunlight. The way Sirius clapped his shoulder without judgment. The way Remus listened quietly, sincerely. To Peter, these friendships were treasure-bright and fragile. The seasons shifted. Snow melted into spring, and the grounds flushed with green. Cherry blossoms drifted lazily across the courtyard, catching in students' hair like confetti. as the Marauders walked together beneath the budding branches. There was laughter, but also the unspoken knowledge that their time as simply students was growing shorter. One warm afternoon, they rested at the edge of the lake. Sunlight shimmered over the water like spilled gold, and the giant squid occasionally surfaced its tentacles, waving lazily. James tossed stones, each one skipping farther than the last, while Sirius sprawled back in the grass with his hands laced behind his head, eyes half closed. Remus leaned against a tree trunk, lost in a book. Peter chewed thoughtfully on a blade of grass, eyes flicking between his friends. "You ever think about what comes next?" he murmured, voice barely louder than the rustle of leaves. Sirius scoffed softly. "What, like after exams, Tonks's party next month? The grand adventure of finding butterbeer cheaper than 3 sickles a bottle?" But Peter shook his head. No after. After Hogwarts, silence drifted over them like the shade of a passing cloud. James tossed his final pebble. It sank immediately. "Well," he said slowly, "whatever it is, we'll face it together." Sirius nodded once, fiercely. "We're a set. Wherever we go, we'd go together," Remus finished quietly, closing his book. There was truth in that moment, a binding thread. As days rolled into weeks, their bond only deepened. They perfected the Marauders' map, scribbling mischievous annotations with bursts of laughter that echoed through the common room. They tested experimental animations on parchment until the edges curled with heat. And sometimes, when no one else was watching, they sat with Remus through grueling nights, anchoring him to himself. But time has a way of changing even the brightest seasons. In their 6th year, whispers darkened the corridors, rumors of a rising shadow. Students walked the halls with sharper eyes. Professors spoke in hushed tones, their expressions drawn. One evening, as rain streaked the windows like silver threads, the Marauders gathered in an unused classroom, candlelight flickering across their faces. "There's something happening out there," James said softly. "We can't pretend we don't see it." Remus stared down at his hands. "People are scared." Sirius's jaw tightened. "People should be angry." Peter swallowed. "What do we do?" James looked at them one by one and felt the weight of all their futures pressing against his ribs like an invisible hand. "We do what's right," he whispered. Outside, thunder rumbled, but inside, 4 young hearts steadied themselves like lantern flames in the dark. Spring gave way to summer. Exams came and went. The castle swelled with bittersweet anticipation. Students carved their initials into secret corners, leaving tiny legacies behind. Laughter rang louder. Tears clung longer. On their final evening before returning home for holidays, the Marauders climbed to the astronomy tower. The night sky glittered vast and velvet. A shooting star streaked across, trailing brilliance. Sirius nudged Peter. "Make a wish." Peter closed his eyes, breathing hope into the darkness. James rested his elbows on the cool stone railing. "Funny, I always thought we'd have more time." "We do," Remus said, but his voice was soft, uncertain. Wind stirred their hair, carrying the scent of wild grass, parchment, ink, and memories yet to be forged. None of them could know what lay ahead, that their brightest moments would soon be shadowed by war, that loyalty would soon be tested, that tragedy would paint their legacy. But for now, they were simply for boys beneath an endless sky, laughing softly, side by side, together. And as the candles flickered in faraway windows, Hogwarts itself seemed to sigh a castle full of secrets, witnessing the fleeting glow of youth, preserving it gently in its ancient stones. Just beyond the horizon, dawn waited patiently. But for tonight, the world held perfectly still. Summer returned with a brightness that seemed almost stubborn, as if the sun itself refused to acknowledge the gathering gloom in the outside world. When the Marauders came back to Hogwarts for their final year, they found the castle subtly changed. The air was thick with worry. Though classes continued, laughter echoed, and life persisted. Professors arrived to class looking more tired than usual. Auras could sometimes be spotted speaking urgently with the headmaster near the doors. Even Filch patrolled the hallways with a harsher glare, clutching his lantern a little tighter. And yet Hogwarts still cradled its students gently. One crisp September evening, James and Sirius sprawled in the Gryffindor common room, quills tapping against parchment as they attempted homework. Lamps cast a mellow glow against red and gold banners, and a kettle whistled softly on the hearth. But Sirius's attention drifted, his eyes flicking to the portrait hole, where a younger student hurried past, pale and trembling. "You noticed that," he muttered. James nodded slowly. "More of them look like that every day." Remus set down his book, brows drawn. "They hear whispers from home. People are fleeing, some disappearing." Peter swallowed. "Have things ever been this bad?" Remus exhaled, shoulders heavy. "Not in centuries." Silence pressed around them, broken only by the fire's crackling breath. James clicked his quill. "Then we help how we can." Sirius grinned faintly. "Ah, yes. James Potter, professional reckless optimist." James nudged him with his elbow. "Better than being professionally broody." "Oh, that's Remus's job," Sirius quipped instantly. Remus lifted his teacup. "And I do it with pride." The laughter that followed was small, but it warmed the room. As autumn matured, classes grew harder and more advanced. Transfiguration lessons demanded intense focus. Charms required delicate precision. Defense against the dark arts turned more practical professor. Flitwick murmured quietly about shielding spells, deflection techniques, and how fear could twist even simple magic. In the corridors, Lily Evans walked with purpose, clutching heavy textbooks to her chest. She and James had begun to speak more not in teasing volleys, but real conversations. Sometimes she pulled a chair beside him in the library, parchment rustling softly as they studied. Sirius would smirk knowingly whenever she appeared. "She's good for you," he whispered one evening while they hunched over the Marauders' map. James pretended not to hear, cheeks warming, and changed the subject with theatrical skill. Lily occasionally paused to speak with Remus, too, exchanging thoughtful comments about books they both read. She greeted Peter kindly, always with a gentle smile. Even Sirius, who often acted brashly, found himself lowering his voice slightly around her. There was something grounding about Lily Evans, something bright and steady through uncertain times. Winter arrived early. Snow blanketed the grounds in thick silence, and the forbidden forest loomed darker than ever. On a particularly icy night, storms battered the castle windows. Students lay awake listening to thunder rumble like distant drums. Remus stood by a window, rubbing his arms against the chill. The moon hung bright and full, its glow pressing into him like an old ache. From deep within, the wolf stirred. The Marauders gathered around him quietly, not speaking, just being there. James handed him a calming potion. Sirius placed a hand on his back, firm and steady. Peter offered a blanket, small gestures, but powerful. "Another night," Remus murmured, voice slightly tremulous. "Another night with us," Sirius replied, and that was enough. By spring, recruitment posters began appearing, even here tacked discreetly behind bookcases, slipped under common room doors, offered to older students whose eyes held questions. The Order of the Phoenix, a resistance forming in the shadows. Some students whispered about joining, others avoided the topic entirely. One warm evening beneath blossoming trees, James sat with Lily near the lake. Fireflies drifted lazily, blinking like sleepy stars. "You're thinking about it," Lily said softly. James blinked. "Thinking about what?" "Joining," she whispered. "Fighting." James paused. The weight of destiny seemed to settle on his shoulders. "If there's wrong in the world, shouldn't we try to fix it?" Lily's eyes glimmered, sad, proud. "I just don't want to lose people." He reached for her hand. "You won't lose me." But somewhere deep inside, doubt trembled. Across the lake, Remus leaned against a willow tree, watching the water ripple. He closed his eyes, letting the breeze ruffle his hair. He feared, more than anything, losing the people who made him feel whole. Be serious, trained harder than ever, practicing spells until his wand hummed with heat. His eyes carried fierce determination, a vow to never become what he escaped. Peter watched them all, admiration swelling in his chest, but something else stirred too. Fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being enough. As their final summer sun dipped below the horizon, Hogwarts hosted a grand farewell feast. Candles floated overhead, dripping warm light. Tables overflowed with steaming dishes. Students laughed and toasted, and clung to one another like threads in a tapestry. James clapped Peter on the back, to Uther unstoppable. Sirius raised his goblet, high, to trouble. Remus smiled softly, to friendship. Lily added, to courage. They clinked goblets, metal chiming like bells over still water. Music played, dancers spun. Even professors allowed smiles to soften their weary eyes. And somewhere in the rafters, an owl hooted a lonely, echoing sound. That night, the Marauders made their way once more to the astronomy tower. Their footsteps were quiet, reverent. The view was breathtaking. Stars spilled across the ink-dark sky like scattered diamonds. Constellations shimmered with ancient magic. James leaned on the railing. "Feels like the whole world's holding its breath." Remus's voice was gentle. I suppose we're on the edge of everything. Sirius's laugh was soft, almost fragile. Well, it'll take more than fear to stop us. Peter swallowed hard, heart thudding. He looked at each face, their brightness, their certainty, and something heavy settled inside him. He wanted so desperately to belong forever. A meteor arced across the sky, leaving a glowing tail. "Make another wish," Sirius murmured. This time, none of them spoke their wishes aloud. They simply breathed side by side, wrapped in the warm hush of friendship. The moon bathed them in silver. The breeze kissed their faces. For a moment, the world was perfect. Banned Hogwarts, ancient and patient, stood like a guardian around them. Softly, it whispered through stone and memory. Remember this. Tomorrow, paths would diverge. Choices would carve futures. Friendships would be tested. Hearts would break and break again. But for tonight, 4 young souls rested under endless stars, close enough to hear each other breathe. Together, always together. Morning arrived, soft and pale, painting the great hall in hues of dawn. Students gathered with trunks stacked and owls hooting softly from the rafters. Professors stood by the doors, offering final nods, faint smiles, quiet pride. Even Filch, clutching his broom, watched with something like sentiment flickering beneath his stern exterior. James, Sirius, Remus, Peter, and Lily stepped into the courtyard together, steam curling from the scarlet engine of the Hogwarts Express. Laughter echoed, tears shimmered, the scent of coal and parchment danced in the air. They boarded, found their compartment, and watched the castle shrink beyond the glass turrets and towers, turning miniature, then distant, then gone. James rested his forehead against the window. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Remus nodded. "Like closing your favorite book." Sirius leaned back, hands behind his head. "Then it's time we write the sequel." Peter smiled nervously, uncertain but eager. The train rattled onward, carrying them into the arms of a world unraveling. London greeted them with heavy skies. Posters covered brick walls, faces of missing witches and wizards, warnings, government notices. Ministry officials patrolled with stern wands tucked at their sides. It was subtle at first, this shift in the air. Shops on Diagon Alley locked their doors earlier. The leaky cauldron dimmed its lamps sooner. Conversations hushed at the mention of certain names. James and Sirius took a flat together, small but cozy, overlooking a bustling street of magical tailors and bookshops. They decorated it with Quidditch posters, mismatched furniture, warm blankets, and under Protester's stack of Remus's books. Remus himself rented a room not far away, quiet and contemplative. He spent late evenings reading by candlelight, the pages whispering comfort. Peter found lodging near them as well, though his room was smaller, tucked above a bakery that always smelled of cinnamon. He would fall asleep to the warmth of ovens below and wake to pastries rising like soft clouds. The 4 met frequently, visiting old haunts Florian Fortescue's for Sundays, quality Quidditch supplies for nervous browsing, flourish and blots for Remus's indulgent purchases. But every time a stranger hurried past, or a wand clattered against pavement. Shoulders tensed. Something was happening. Something dark. It wasn't long before Dumbledore sought them out. One rainy evening, thunder rolling like distant drums, the headmaster stood in James and Sirius's living room. His robes smelled faintly of parchment and storm air. His expression, though kind, was lined with fatigue. "I ask not lightly," he began, voice soft. James straightened. Sirius held his breath. Remus listened with furrowed brow. Peter's heart raced. "There is a group rising that would reshape our world with fear," Dumbledore explained. "But good people are uniting. The Order of the Phoenix needs help." James answered first, without hesitation. "We're in." Sirius nodded fiercely. Remus, after a breath. Peter lost his voice, thin, though still audible. Dumbledore's eyes shone with quiet gratitude. "Then we stand together." And with that, they stepped into a conflict older than any of them truly understood. Their days became structured by secrecy meetings in dim, candlelit basements. Briefings whispered under disillusionment charms, practice duels in abandoned courtyards, wand sparks scattering like fireflies. James honed his shield charms, protective magic blossoming from his wand like shimmering blossoms. He preferred defending others to harming them. Sirius trained with fierce precision, his spells sharp and decisive. He moved like wildfire, bright and unstoppable. Remus excelled at strategy, mapping patrol routes, deciphering patterns, noticing what others missed. His quiet mind became a cornerstone of the Order's efforts. Peter tried, he followed instructions, performed simple support tasks, sending messages, copying maps, relaying supplies. But pressure coiled inside him like steel wire. Still, together they held. James and Lily blossomed. She joined the Order soon after, cloak fluttering at her heels, eyes full of resolve. In dangerous missions, they fought back to back. When exhaustion weighed heavy, they clasped hands without speaking. Their love deepened, not in dramatic declarations, but in shared, silent cups of tea late at night, dancing slowly in an empty kitchen, laughter at tiny absurdities. Friends joked, as friends do, but they meant every word of support. Even Sirius grew protective of Lily, teasing her lightly and defending her fiercely. Their home radiated warmth, a sanctuary against the storm. But not all bonds held firm. Sirius's family, the ancient black line-sent letters, thick with venom and disappointment. He burned them unread, ashes scattering across his kitchen floor. "Blood doesn't dictate destiny," he muttered under his breath. Remus sensed distant tremors, whispers about his condition, murmured doubts behind closed doors. He felt eyes lingering too long, trust wavering. He said nothing, wearing a mask of calm. Peter felt invisible. Missions gave him fewer responsibilities. Orders arrived through intermediaries. The darkness outside seemed vast, hungry, and his more uncertain. Fear whispered to him at night, "You will be forgotten." Still, there were pockets of joy. Game night at James and Lily's flat, laughter booming over the clatter of butterbeer bottles. Sunday dinners with mountains of mashed potatoes and Sirius's questionable cooking experiments. long wand practice in quiet parks under a silver moon. Remus read stories aloud sometimes, voice steady, soothing. Peter would listen wide-eyed. James and Lily curled up together. Sirius pretended not to enjoy it, but always stayed until the end. Fire crackled. Rain tapped at window. Time drifted, gentle. The world could not touch them here. Years rippled onward like ink through parchment. The Order fought valiantly, but the enemy grew cleverer, crueler. Rumors spread of informants, conspiracies, spies. Every loss felt sharper. One evening, after a grueling mission, the four sat in James's living room, mud on boots, smoke on cloaks, exhaustion in every breath. "We're going to win," James insisted, though his eyes shimmered with doubt. Sirius punched his shoulder gently. "You always say that." "And he's usually right," Remus added. Peter nodded, though his gaze flicked away. But outside the window, shadows pooled in the alleys below. Quiet footfalls, whispered oaths. Darkness crept closer. The Marauders' once unshakable bond began to loosen, so slowly at first that none noticed. Missions pulled them in separate directions. New recruits joined. Papers stacked. Briefings blurred. Days were spent dodging curses. Nights calming trembling nerves. James and Lily married quietly, just close friends in attendance. A string of fairy lights glimmered overhead. Candles floated like tiny stars, and music drifted softly across a secluded garden. Sirius gave a speech both heartfelt and mischievous, earning laughter and tears. Remus hugged them both tightly, wishing desperately that peace could be gifted. Peter congratulated them earnestly, though something tightened in his chest. Later, James and Lily danced slowly across a wooden floor, stars reflecting in their eyes. It was perfect, gentle, fleeting. For even as vows were spoken, the world trembled. Not long after, Lily discovered she was pregnant. The news spread among friends like warm sunlight. Sirius nearly dropped his broom in shock. Remus smiled quietly, eyes damp with emotion. Peter congratulated them again, voice small but genuine. Tiny socks were knitted, storybooks purchased. James practiced lullabies on his broom badly. For a brief moment, hope flourished. But the enemy heard whispers, two prophecies, destinies, children born with power. Fear turned prophetic words into targets, and the looming night grew darker. One storm-lashed evening, Peter Pettigrew walked alone through narrow alleyways. Shadows pooled beneath flickering lamps. Rain slicked cobblestones like glass. A cloaked figure emerged. Gold eyes gleamed. Promised protection. Promised belonging. Promised to quiet the gnawing fear. In a heartbeat desperate for significance, Peter listened. A handshake. A vow in whisper. And with that, the invisible thread that bound for boys pulled taut, then frayed, then quietly snapped. James tucked Lily close beneath soft blankets, whispering nonsense names for their unborn child. Sirius meticulously warded their house, hands trembling with protective fury. Remus studied curse-breaking, trying to build walls stronger than fear. They did not know the circle had been breached. Not yet. not tonight. Tonight rain washed the streets clean. Candles flickered. A wolf sighed beneath a wool blanket. Friends breathed deeply in their sleep. The world held its breath, and somewhere lightning forked across a black sky, illuminating a path that could not be unmade. Summer cradled the village of Godric's Hollow in warm light. The quaint cottages hummed with quiet life gardens, brimming with blossoms, chimneys puffing polite clouds, owls perched lazily in rafters. It was a haven, wrapped in hedgerows and spellwork. James and Lily retreated here, their home secured by enchantments layered like blankets. Sirius helped install them complex charms woven through brick and beam. Alarm runes glowed faintly along doorframes. Protective barriers shimmered invisibly above rooftops. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and baby blankets. Toys sat stacked in careful rows. A gently rocking cradle rested beside a window overlooking the sleepy street. Harry slept there often, tiny breaths soft against moonlit curtains. Lily, hair tied loosely, hummed lullabies older than Hogwarts itself. James, wand tucked behind his ear, practiced calming charms that made bubbles float lazily through the air. Harry giggled, reaching tiny hands toward glimmering spheres. Life, briefly, felt whole. Sirius visited often, sweeping through the door like a whirlwind, arms full of gifts, stuffed hippogriffs, tiny broom replicas, shrieking tea kettles that Lily banished instantly. Remus visited too, quieter visits, bringing books, soft blankets, charms to ease sleep. He would sit by the cradle, watching Harry breathe, something tender unfolding in his chest. Peter visited as well, always smiling, always offering to help. But his eyes flickered when wards glowed, when maps were mentioned, when James whispered cautiously about traitors. He left quickly these days, muttering excuses. No one challenged the tremor in his voice. Nights in Godric's Hollow unfolded slowly. Lanterns glowed along garden paths. The scent of honey drifted from window panes. Cats prowled lazily across fences, tails twitching in the calm. James would sometimes step outside just to breathe the crisp evening air, hands in pockets, hair tousled. He gazed at stars and wondered if peace could endure. Lily joined him, arms folded, leaning lightly into his side. They said nothing but silence held them warmly. Harry's laughter drifted faintly from inside, carried by crackling fireplaces and lullabies. Neighbors waved from porches. Children played quietly with enchanted marbles. Elders sipped warm cider, gossiping about harmless things. War felt far away, at least for a moment. In the halls of the Ministry and the whispers of Hogwarts, an ancient prophecy stirred. It spoke of a child born as July waned, a child marked to challenge shadow. Dumbledore guarded the words, storing them deep within his memory. But rumors leaked like ink spreading through parchment. Fear twisted them. Names circulated. Threats sharpened. James and Lily were advised to hide deeper. And so they placed trust in the most fragile of things, a secret shared between friends. The Fidelius, charm complex, delicate, binding. A single secret keeper, would hold the location of their home within their soul, unreachable except by permission. Everyone assumed Sirius, but Sirius insisted another ought to bear that weight. Too obvious, he reasoned, to expect it. The Dark Lord will suspect me first, he suggested Peter, and they agreed. Remus smiled softly. James clasped Peter's hands. Lily kissed his cheek. Sirius patted his shoulder. Peter trembled, and fate trembled with him. As October shadows lengthened, rain lashed the windows of safe houses. Meetings dwindled. The Order lost contact with key allies. The enemy moved silently now, with precision honed to a razor's edge. Remus found himself sent away on distant missions far from headquarters, far from friends. He suspected distrust, whispers about his condition. He felt like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong corner. Letter by letter he drifted, serious, restless, patrolled the countryside, cloak snapping in cold wind. His owl carried messages back and forth to James. All quiet here, wards intact. Harry is growing fast. But Sirius's instincts prickled. Something unseen pressed at the edges of every letter. Peter avoided Sirius's gaze, smiled too widely, excused himself too quickly. Sirius, suspicious by nature, felt the hair along his arms stand. He confronted Remus once, privately. "Do you think," Sirius whispered, voice uneven, "someone's talking?" Remus looked away. "We are all frightened. Fear makes us see ghosts, and fear," Sirius replied softly, "makes ghosts real." Yet even amidst tension, joy bloomed like stubborn wildflowers. Harry's first steps, his first laugh that shook his tiny body in glee. His fascination with broom handles, books, shiny baubles. James lifted him high, spinning gently. Lily clapped her hands, tears of pride shimmering. Sirius brought a toy broom that hovered inches above the ground. Harry wobbled, arms outstretched, giggling madly. Remus gifted storybooks of magical rabbits who brewed potions in kettles shaped like moons. Harry babbled happily through every page. Peter brought a rattle shaped like a snitch. Smiles flashed, warmth spread, a snapshot of paradise. October swept across Godric's Hollow. Pumpkins decorated windows. Leaves curled into golden spirals along stone fences. Children carved lanterns, their laughter bright in chill air. James and Lily prepared modestly candles in windows, stew simmering on the stove, blankets folded neatly. The house's wards flickered gently, steady as a heartbeat, but shadows gathered thickly beyond sight. Peter walked alone down a narrow alleyway, cloak pulled tight. His steps echoed sharply. He paused beneath a guttering lantern. A voice hissed, "It is time." Peter swallowed, throat dry. Yes. Promises curled around him like smoke-hollow comfort. He breathed out one last fragile hope, and betrayed it with the next breath. Hogwarts's bells chimed far away, their tones drifting like memory. On October's final night, a wind swept across the countryside, cold, biting, hungry. Clouds parted briefly, revealing a pale moon, then swallowed it again. Candles flickered in windows, doors latched, curtains drawn. In James and Lily's home, laughter drifted gently. Harry fussed sleepily, rubbing tiny fists against tired eyes. Lily rocked him in a chair that creaked rhythmically, whispering lullabies woven from ancient magic. James set dishes in the sink, humming. Sirius paced several towns away, unease clawing at his ribs. Something in the air tasted wrong. Remus, sitting alone in a rented cottage, felt his stomach knot. He placed his book aside, staring at the door as if expecting anyone to burst through. Peter hid in the dark, fingers trembling, heart pounding. The world inhaled, held breath, waited. The strike came like thunder apparition, crackling, boots pounding cobblestone. A door blasted open in green fire. James leaped from his chair, wandless, shouting for Lily to run. Standing not as a marauder, but as a father, he lunged with empty hands. A flash of green ended the moment. Upstairs, Lily stumbled into the nursery, heart racing, shielding Harry with fierce, tearful eyes. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. "You needn't die," a cold voice whispered. "Not Harry," she pleaded. "He's just a baby." But love is louder than reason, and mothers do not move aside. Another flash of green, soft thud. Silence deepened. Harry screamed not in fear alone, but in something ancient, something magic. A final curse flew, and everything exploded into white. Far away, Sirius crumpled, clutching his chest breath, knocked from him by something unseen. "No," he choked, staggering. Remus dropped his teacup, porcelain shattering across wood. He stared into nothing. Tears pooled without permission. Peter sank into shadows, trembling, and somewhere Voldemort's scream tore through the night as his body unraveled, curse rebounding, ripping destiny apart. Lightning forked across the sky, and then Sirius arrived first. Smoke drifted from the cottage. Doors hung from weak hinges. Lanterns guttered. He stumbled inside, found James, fell to his knees, whispered broken words only ghosts could hear. He found Lily upstairs, hair fanned like a halo, arms outstretched toward the cradle. He gently closed her eyes. Harry sobbed from within the crib, unharmed but marked with lightning's echo. Sirius lifted him, cradling him close, heart fracturing. Hagrid arrived soon after, massive frame shaking with grief. Orders from Dumbledore carried weight like prophecy. Sirius hesitated, then handed Harry over with trembling arms. "I'm his godfather," he whispered. "I know," Hagrid murmured gently, "and you'll see him again." Sirius nodded, but fear already curled around his fate. Police sirens wailed faintly somewhere distant. Lights flickered. Villagers gasped at smoke clouds. Ministry owls swooped overhead. Sirius mounted his bike, fury boiling. He knew where to go. He found Peter in a crowded street. Peter turned, eyes wide, voice shrill. "Lily and James." He cried theatrically. "How could you think it was me?" Sirius's hand shook on his wand. Peter's eyes hardened. A wand flick. A massive explosion shattered the street. Screams, smoke, stone fragments flying. When the dust cleared, Peter was gone, leaving only a severed finger and a crater full of stunned muggles. Sirius laughter, hollow, broken sound. And with that, chains of destiny snapped shut. Azkaban swallowed Sirius Black like a beast steel bars, dementors drifting like fog. He sat in silence for years, replaying stars on a tower, laughter in a dorm, baby hands reaching toward shimmering spells. He whispered their names to keep them alive. Remus withdrew into solitude, books stacked like walls. He wandered forests, villages, empty libraries. Guilt pressed upon him like winter frost. Peter, hidden, served. The Marauders' map, once inked with mischief, lay forgotten in a drawer at Hogwarts, slumbering, and Hogwarts itself mourned quietly, candles flickering, stone sighing. Time flowed, gentle as river water. Harry grew with love from his aunt and uncle, though their affection was colder than British rain. But the boy endured with stubborn spark. Years later, Hogwarts would receive him wide-eyed, scar gleaming, destiny humming. He would find friends who made him whole. He would learn spells whispered by moonlight. He would stand in forests lit by prophecy. And someday, against all odds, he would know the truth of those who came before. James, with hair wild as storms. Lily, with love fierce as fire. Sirius, loyal even through bars. Remus, gentle as autumn wind. Peter, small and trembling, a wheel whose turning captured everything. Years later, Remus would stand again under the astronomy tower, older now. Silver threaded his hair, scars mapped his skin. The breeze sighed around him, just as it had once before. He closed his eyes. He heard laughter echo down the sentries' broomsticks, soaring, homework scattered, firelight flickering. For young boys beneath stars, brighter than hope. Remus placed a hand against the railing. For a moment, he whispered, "We were invincible." His voice broke, then steadied, and for that, I'm grateful. He breathed in starlight. Let it ground him, let it heal. Below, Hogwarts glowed against midnight, a beacon for those who would come next. And somewhere in the quiet, as torches dimmed and candles guttered, you could almost hear paws padding across stones, claws tapping lightly, a dog's bark of laughter, 4 feet racing through dreams, as a rat scurried hungrily behind. Ghost co's, memory magic, friendship immortal. The Marauders' moony wormtail, padfoot, prongs etched forever into the walls of time. Their footsteps humming through corridors, their map slumbering in drawers, their mischief in portraits, smiles. And so lay down your wand, rest your eyes. Let the fire's glow soften, for stories like this are lanterns in darkness, warm, gentle, guiding. Friendship's legacy endures, even when shadows fall, especially then. In moonlit memories, they run still young, and laughing beneath infinite stars. The end, and always the beginning.